Now let's spend a little time getting to know our BA2 Plus calculator app. On your screen, you see the old style calculator. Our screen, our phone app should look just like that, okay? Except a little more updated at this point. So there's a few keys that I want to go through. You see it lists 5 very basic function keys that we have to discuss. But first I want to talk about a few other ones that we see on here. So if we start in the top left of our app, you will see the CPT key. Whenever I say compute, that is the key that we're referencing, is that compute key. The next one is the enter key. I want to break the habit. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see a big equal sign. When I say enter, that's not what we're talking about. A lot of times students think equal, enter, same thing. They hit the equal sign, that throws off their calculations. So whenever I said say the word enter, that's what you want to hit. The next two that we have are the scroll up and scroll down arrows. We'll explain those more in just a little bit. On the second row down, we have the orange colored or gold colored second key. That will become an important key to us. We're going to hit that a lot, maybe more than any key on the calculator. Next to that is the CF key for cash flow. We will discuss that a little bit later. Then we have the net present value and internal rate of return keys next to that, which are very, very important, and we will use those a lot as we go forward. Just next to that, you see the arrow that signals assigned to the right. If you put an extra number in and you want to take it out, you just hit that one time. It'll take out the last number that you put in. Now, the third row down, this is very, very important to us. As you see on the screen, it starts on the left with the N. That's the number of years. So how many years is the investment going to be for? The calculation, all of this, okay? And if you want to see any of this, page 183 in your textbook has a further description of that as well. The next one over is the IY, which will be the interest rate or the discount rate that we mentioned earlier, right? The rate that you use to discount the future cash flows based on what it costs you to borrow the money. So that's the interest rate. The next one there is the PV, or present value. We'll do many calculations on present value. The next one over is payment, PMT. And then the final one on that row is the FV, or future value calculation, another key that we'll use quite often. All right, if we look to the very bottom left of our app screen, you will see the clear key in the bottom left-hand corner. That is another key that we use quite often. All right, so a few things we want to do to make sure our calculator app is ready to go. All right, so that goldish or orange colored second button that we see there, hit that, and then the decimal key in the very bottom middle next to the 0 and between the 0 and the plus minus, okay? And on everybody's calculator, that should say 4. If it says 2, just type 4 and then the enter key on the top screen, and then hit clear, and then you should have 5 zeros across your screen, a 0, a decimal, and then 4 zeros after that. That tells you that the calculator is properly set. The next thing we want to check is we're going to do only annual compounding in this class, so we want to make sure the calculator is set to that. So if you hit the second key again and then the IY, it should say 1. Okay, some of your calculator apps may say 12, but you want it to say 1. So if yours says 12, just type 1 and then again that enter key at the top left and hit that and then clear, and then we are all set and ready to go on those for calculations. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to do our first calculation. Okay, so this is what's called a single sum or lump sum investment. We mentioned a CD, or certificate of deposit, at the beginning of this lecture in this chapter. And this is what we're talking about when we do this calculation here. This is essentially a certificate of deposit. Generally, in that case, you put in a single sum or a lump sum amount of money, and that is all that is involved in the calculation. And you want to figure out what is the value of this at some point in the future. So in this scenario, we're going to invest $1,000. at 12% interest for 5 years. Now, let's make it clear, you cannot get 12% interest today on a CD. There was a time you could that day. It does not exist anymore. But I need you to see the effect of interest, so we've raised that interest rate up higher than we normally would do. So what we want to do is we're going to do every single time before we do a calculation, we're going to hit that second key, that orange key, and then the clear button in the bottom left-hand corner. Then we're going to hit second FV. Why are we doing that? Well, it's a little hang up in the app, so that in the free app, it requires you to do that every time before you do a calculation. So just get in the habit of doing that every single time. It'll make things much, much easier for you. You won't make any calculation mistakes. Otherwise, you have to memorize when you want to do a certain calculation. Instead of doing that, just always do second clear, second FV before you start all calculations, and you won't have to worry about making a mistake on those. All right, so now that we've done that, then we're going to type in the 1,000 that's on our screen, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, right next to the equal sign, there's a plus minus sign. And we're going to hit that, and we're going to convert this to negative. All of our present value entries go in as negative numbers. Why do they do that? Because it's assuming that you are going to take that money from somewhere. In order to invest it in a CD, you're going to have to remove it from another checking account or a savings account or some other type of investment. So you want a negative number there all the time. So after you do that, now it should say negative 1,000 on your screen, and you hit the PV button. So now you should see PV equals negative 1,000 on your screen. And the next thing you're going to do, and you could do this in any order, but we're going to do 5N. So just type the 5 and then N, and don't do anything in between it. Now it'll say N equals 5 on your screen. Then do 12 IY. Now your screen should say IY equals 12. And now we're going to do compute future value. So the CPT key at the top left, and compute future value. And you should see on your app a number that looks just like what you see on the screen. You're probably going to see 1762.3417, and we'll see why that's important in just a minute, okay? But you now have calculated your first future value. So what does that number mean to us? Well, what that is telling us is that if we invest $1,000, we're going to go back a screen here for a second, $1,000 at 12% interest, and we leave it for 5 years, at the end of the 5 years, we'll have $1,762.34. So that is what this calculation tells us. All right, so now we're going to spend a little time, and we're going to do the present value of a single sum. So if at some point in the future we had a dollar value, how much would I have to invest today to get there? So if you wanted to go on a trip at some point in the future, how much money would I need to make that trip happen in 5 years? If I put away this much money today at a set interest rate, I would have this money when I want to go on the trip. So now we're going to calculate that. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do the second clear, second future value. I know we're calculating present value. We're going to do that on every calculation. So now we're going to put in that 1762.34. And we're going to enter that as a future value. We do not convert that to negative. In case I didn't say this earlier, all present value entries 100% of the time go in as a negative number. No future value entry ever goes in as a negative number. It's always a positive number. So we hit the 1762.34 as our future value. Then we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous one. We hit 5, and then we hit N. Then we hit 12 IY, and now we're going to compute present value. Okay? And when we do, most of you are probably looking at your screen thinking, oh, I got that wrong, because you got negative 999.9990. did not do that incorrectly. I did that intentionally. I left off that 1/7. If you remember our calculation, when we did this calculation here, it gave us 1762.3417. So we're going to do this again. I did this on intentionally. We're going to do second clear, second future value again. Now we're going to put 1762.3417 future value in our calculators. Then we're going to hit 5N, 12IY, compute PV, and now we have a present value of negative 1,000, which is just what we started in the previous slide. So now you have calculated your first present value calculation. All right, so when we deal with single sum or lump sum calculations, as we did in this case, we have to know several things, right? So in order to calculate the future value, we have to know our present value. In order to calculate, we have to know our present value, our N, and our IY, and that allows us to compute future value. If we're going to compute our present value, we're going to need to know the future value, the N, the IY, and then we're going to compute present value, which is what we just did in those two previous calculations. So now we have one other calculation that we're going to do, and this is something called an annuity. An annuity is the amount of money received or paid during each compounding period for a set period of time. And there are two types of annuity. First one is called a regular annuity, which is money received or paid at the end of each compounding period. And then an annuity due, which is money received or paid at the beginning of each compounding period. Okay? Now, thinking, what is an annuity? Well, a really good example of that is the lottery. Many of you, when you drive around, you'll see the lottery. Today, I actually happened to notice that it was $100 million was the prize for the lottery. So if you want to get $100 million from the lottery, you have to accept an annuity. The lottery is paid over a 20-year period. So if you want your $100 million, that means you have to be willing to accept $5 million a year for 20 years in order to get your full $100 million. Now, in most cases, people know that's not the best way to do it. You take what's called a lump sum, and these calculations we're learning to do in this chapter are what are used by lottery offices to determine what that lump sum is. But if you want your whole $100 million, you have to take an annuity. And the annuity is actually, in the lottery's case, an annuity due. Why? Well, if you hit the lottery tonight for $100 million, tomorrow you could take that lottery ticket to the lottery office, and they would give you your first $5 million check, which makes it an annuity due because it was paid today instead of paid at the end of the year. The traditional annuity is actually paid at the end of the year, not at the beginning. So, as we discussed earlier in this lecture, if you're paid earlier, if you get your money earlier, that is more valuable to you. So an annuity due is actually a more valuable investment than an annuity. So what we're going to do now on our calculators is we're going to add one more calculation. We're going to do regular annuity calculations. Okay? So let's clear our calculators. Hit second clear, second future value. We're going to do that every time. Now in this case, we're going to put in 600 and we're going to convert that to negative for our PMT. Okay? And future value and present value entries are easy. Present value is always negative. Future value is never negative. Payments, it depends. If you're making a payment, it's a negative number. If you're receiving a payment, it's not. You will understand that later in the chapter. But in this case, we went ahead and put 600, converted it to negative for PMT. Then we hit 5N, 12IY, and we're going to compute future value, and that gives us 3,811.71. All right, so now the second calculation we're going to do here is the present value. So we're going to do second clear, second future value again. Now, because we're computing present value, we're going to put the 600 in as PMT. We are not going to convert that to negative. Okay. Then we're going to put in 5N, 12IY, compute PV, and that gives us negative 2162.8657, which I have rounded on your screen to 2162.87. Now, if we do this as an annuity due calculation, we're actually going to change our calculators, and we'll do the exact same calculation. As you see, the annuity due calculations are actually higher than a regular annuity. So the value of this, if it's a regular annuity, which means it's paid at the end of each year, is for future value 3811.71. For an annuity due, it's 4269.11.